Imagine asking someone out on a date, only for them to expect you to pay. Sounds normal, right? But what if you're the one who invited them? You're really struggling financially, and when you hesitate, they still call you cheap. Who's actually wrong here? Well, the answer isn't as simple as you think. Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a fascinating, real-life relationship dilemma that has sparked a massive debate.
To set the stage, let's look at a story that's been making the rounds in a growing discussion about modern romance. On one side of the debate, we have a happily married woman who firmly believes that whoever invites the other person out should always foot the bill. To her, it doesn't matter what your gender is or what kind of relationship it is. It's just a simple, straightforward rule. But as the story unfolds, another scenario emerges. A man with very little money finally builds up the courage to ask out a woman, and she accepts. But when the bill arrives at the end of the night, she expects him to pay, simply because he was the one who invited her. He becomes incredibly angry, he feels totally taken advantage of, accuses her of being a gold digger, and just leaves the date completely frustrated. So I want to pause for a second and ask you, who's actually wrong here? Is it the woman for expecting a free meal? Or is it the man for asking someone out when he really couldn't afford it and then completely blowing up? Don't answer immediately, because before you decide who's at fault, we really need to explore both sides fairly. We're going to look at the hidden psychology, the financial realities, and those unspoken rules that drive these explosive moments.
Part 1. Clash of Dating Expectations.
To truly understand this conflict without picking sides too early, we have to explore the invisible forces driving both of these people. It all really comes down to a fundamental clash of dating expectations. You see, we all operate using something psychologists call cognitive relational scripts. Just like a movie script tells actors exactly what to do and say, our brains have an ordered built-in sequence for how specific events are supposed to unfold. Think about dining out at a restaurant, right? Your mental script says you walk in, you sit down, you get greeted, order drinks, eat, and finally, you pay the bill. Well, we have these exact same scripts for romantic relationships and first dates, and they are built entirely on our past experiences and societal norms.
So when this man and woman sat down at the table, their cognitive scripts aggressively clashed. On one hand, you have traditional courtship norms. Historically, research shows that in these traditional scripts, men are expected to display financial stability. Evolutionary theorists sometimes call this demonstrating Veblen goods, which is essentially showing off the ability to afford luxuries and provide security. In that specific script, the man paying is just a given. But on the other hand, you have contemporary courtship norms, which really emphasize independence, self-sufficiency, and often splitting the bill. The woman in our story was operating on a script that said the inviter pays, while the man might have been operating under the assumption of contemporary shared costs, or at least kinda hoping his financial limitations would be understood.
Before you decide who's wrong, consider this. What actually happens in the brain when a script is broken? This brings us to expectancy violation theory, or EVT. Conceived by researcher Judy Burgoon, this theory explains that when our deep-seated relational expectations are unexpectedly violated, our brains instantly have to label that violation as either positive or negative. And when it comes to first dates, a negative violation is instantly perceived as a massive relational red flag. Now, what's really fascinating here is the actual research data backing this up. In studies on dating behaviors, violated traditional courtship norms are frequently reported as highly negative experiences. Participants in romantic relational research explicitly cited things like, a date asking them to pay for dinner because they forgot their wallet, or insisting a woman pay for her own food when she expected otherwise. These are seen as glaring red flags. So when that bill sat unpaid on the table, the woman's expectations weren't just disappointed. Her brain's alarm bells were literally ringing, signaling a fundamental incompatibility.
Part 2. Why assumptions create conflict. But here's where things become complicated, especially when we look at the man's explosive reaction. Why did a simple misunderstanding over a restaurant check escalate into him hurling the insult gold digger? To understand his reaction, we can look at the principles of nonviolent communication developed by Marshall Rosenberg. According to these principles, the man was operating from what is called scarcity thinking. He was completely blinded by his own financial anxiety and his unmet needs for security and understanding. When scarcity thinking gets mixed up with a rigid right and wrong mentality, people become blind to obvious solutions and they just react defensively. He felt trapped by his lack of money, and his fear quickly turned into an attack.
Rosenberg noted that criticism and diagnosis get in the way of peaceful resolution of conflicts. By calling his date a gold digger, the man didn't just express frustration, he used a destructive diagnosis. The moment he diagnosed her character, he instantly forced the situation into self-defense and counter-accusations. At that point, there was no longer any room for a peaceful resolution or a calm conversation about how to handle the bill.
Most people completely overlook one important detail in this whole dilemma. Both individuals fell into a massive right and wrong thinking trap. They rigidly expected the other person to just seamlessly read their mind. They walked into the date with unspoken rules, completely failing to communicate their financial realities or their expectations beforehand. They essentially assumed their own personal script was the only correct script in the world.
Part 3. Building a healthy relationship.
So how do we actually move past these rigid assumptions and avoid these first date disasters? Well, according to CBT professionals and relationship experts, couples with high emotional intelligence learn to establish safe ground rules for communication long before a conflict ever escalates. They do something absolutely critical. They separate problem discussion from problem solution. Instead of waiting for the bill to arrive to have a standoff, healthy communicators set expectations early. If a conflict does arise, emotionally intelligent people don't attack. They use specific, constructive communication strategies. First, they validate the other person's feelings before responding, so even if they disagree, they acknowledge the stress of the situation. Second, they communicate without blame. Instead of saying, "You're a gold digger," a healthy response might be, "I'm feeling really overwhelmed by this expense right now." And third, they set emotional boundaries. They aren't afraid to take a timeout to lower the temperature rather than letting things escalate into name-calling.
Building a true foundation of connection requires something a bit deeper. Healthy relationships are actually built on consistently answering each other's emotional needs. Dr. John Gottman calls these bids for connection. It's all about ensuring both partners feel safe, seen, and soothed. If the man had felt safe enough to just say, "Hey, I'd love to take you out, but I'm on a tight budget right now. Could we grab a coffee instead?" the entire script would have changed. Openly discussing expectations builds mutual empathy and respect, which is the exact opposite of what happened at that restaurant table. Ultimately, a successful date isn't determined by who pays the bill. It's determined by honesty, proactive communication, shared expectations, and mutual respect. The dilemma we explored today wasn't actually a fight about money. It was a collision of unspoken scripts, fueled by financial anxiety and a real lack of emotional vocabulary. So now that we've unpacked the psychology behind the clash, I want to turn it back over to you. Who do you think should pay on the first date? The person who asked? The man? The woman? Or should couples split the bill? Tell us why in the comments. And if you enjoy relationship psychology, real-life relationship dilemmas, and practical dating advice, subscribe to Relationship Vault for more videos every week. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.